I'm Saul 38, standing in the living room where I grew up. The walls are faded, the same pale yellow from my childhood, and the air smells of dust and old wood. My dad's face is red, his laugh sharp, as he tosses Grandpa's will into the fireplace. The paper curls, blackens gone. He thinks he's won, that the land is his to sell. I smile, not out of joy, but because I know something he doesn't. There's another copy hidden years ago in a place only I know. Grandpa trusted me, not him. I've carried that secret like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold for over a decade. My smile feels like a mask hiding the churn of betrayal and resolve inside me. Dad's laughter bounces off the walls, oblivious to the shift in me. I stand still, the heat of the fire brushing my skin, knowing this moment changes everything. If you've ever held a truth you couldn't speak, stick around. The fire's glow faded, leaving ash and a faint smoke trail in the living room. The mantel clock ticked too loud, marking the seconds since Dad's betrayal. He clapped his hands like he'd just closed a deal and walked out to take a call, his voice booming through the thin walls. I stood there, the weight of my smile heavier now, my fingers brushing the edge of the couch where I used to sit with Grandpa. I was 25 when he sat me down in his study, the room dim with the scent of pipe tobacco and leather. His hands trembled as he handed me a sealed envelope, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Your father's hungry, but not for family," he said. I didn't believe him then. I was young, thought loyalty was thicker than warnings. I took the envelope, nodded, and promised to keep it safe. He didn't ask for more, just looked at me with those tired blue eyes, like he already knew what was coming, his face etched with a sadness I couldn't grasp. I hid it that night under the floorboards of the old treehouse out back. It was a stupid spot, a kid's hiding place, but it felt right. The treehouse was where Grandpa told me stories about the land, how it held our family's roots, how it was more than dirt. I buried the envelope in a rusted tobacco tin, the kind he used to keep on his desk, its lid scratched from years of use. I forgot about it, let it sink into the past, until now. The memory of his voice came back sharp, cutting through the haze of years as I stood in the living room, the ashes still warm. Dad's been different since Grandpa died 6 months ago. He's louder, sharper, like a man chasing something. I noticed the new watch on his wrist last week, gold and heavy, not the kind a mechanic like him could afford. His shoes too, polished leather, not the scuffed boots I grew up seeing. We're not rich, never were. The land's all we've got, 200 acres of rolling fields Grandpa swore to keep in the family. Dad's been talking about selling it, calling it a burden, saying we'd be better off with cash. I didn't argue, not yet. But something in his voice, the way he avoided my eyes, the way he stood too close to the realtor, Marjorie, made me think of Grandpa's warning. It was like a whisper from the grave, stirring something I'd buried. Last night I couldn't sleep. Wanda was out late working her shift at the hospital, so I went to Dad's place. The house was dark, the porch sagging under years of neglect. His office door was cracked open, papers scattered on the desk, lit by a dim desk lamp. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Bank statements not in his name, but some company I'd never heard of. Deposits, big ones, from a real estate firm. thousands wired in chunks over the last 3 months. My stomach turned a cold sweat prickling my skin. I took photos with my phone, my hands steady, but my chest tight like I was holding my breath underwater. I didn't know what it meant, not exactly, but it wasn't right. The numbers stared back at me, proof of something I wasn't ready to name. This morning, I drove to the treehouse, the dirt road rutted and overgrown. It's half collapsed now, the wood soft with rot, the ladder creaking under my weight. The tin was still there, buried under dirt and splinters, its surface cold and gritty. I didn't open it, just held it, feeling the edges dig into my palm. Grandpa's words echoed sharp and clear. Hungry, but not for family. I sat in my truck, the engine off, the silence pressing in. I wanted to call Dad, ask him straight, but what would I say? Accuse him without proof. The dashboard clock blinked, the numbers glowing faintly. I was doubting him, and it felt like a betrayal of my own. Or maybe he'd betrayed us first. Dad called while I was driving back, his voice all charm, like he was selling a used car. Family meeting tomorrow, he said. We need to settle the estate, get everyone on the same page. I said sure, kept my tone flat, my fingers tight on the wheel. He didn't notice the edge in my silence. He never does. But I caught the undercurrent in his laugh, like he was hiding something behind it. The tin sat heavy in my jacket pocket, a secret I wasn't ready to show. Not yet. The road stretched out, lined with wildflowers, their colors muted in the morning light. I kept driving, my mind turning over what I'd found, what I'd buried, and what I might have to do. I parked the truck outside our house, the tin still in my pocket, its weight pulling at my thoughts. The front yard was overgrown, the mailbox leaning slightly, rust creeping up its pole. Wanda was home, her scrubs crumpled on the couch, the TV flickering with some late-night talk show, its volume low. She asked how my day was, her voice soft but tired, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. I mumbled something about work, not meeting her eyes, and moved to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. The truth sat heavy, a pressure behind my ribs, but I couldn't share it yet. Not until I knew more. I slipped the tin into a drawer under some old bills, out of sight, and the clink of it against the drawer's wood felt final, like hiding a piece of myself. The next morning, I drove to the library, the only place in town with free internet I trusted. The building was quiet, the air thick with the smell of old books and wax polish. I sat in a corner, the photos of Dad's bank statements open on my phone, their numbers glaring in the dim light. I searched the company name, Pinnacle Holdings, a real estate firm based an hour away, with a website full of glossy promises about land development, luxury estates, gated communities. My jaw tightened as I read about their projects, all built on old family properties, the kind Grandpa despised. A news article buried in a local paper's archive detailed Pinnacle buying up farmland cheap, then flipping it for millions. No mention of Dad, but the timing of those deposits lined up too well. I scrolled through their site, my thumb pausing on a photo of a smiling executive, his suit too crisp for this town. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, the hum of fluorescent lights steady overhead. The library's silence felt like a weight, pressing my thoughts into sharp focus. I wanted to call Wanda, tell her everything, the statements, the tin Grandpa's warning, but she'd worry. She'd ask why I was digging into Dad's business, why I couldn't just let it go. I didn't have an answer. That wouldn't sound like obsession. The tin, the statements, Grandpa's words, they were pieces of a puzzle I couldn't ignore, each one clicking into place with a cold certainty. But every step felt like I was pulling at a thread that might unravel us all, not just Dad. I drove to the diner across town where Marjorie, the realtor, Dad's been talking to, sometimes worked out of a back booth. The place smelled of grease and burnt coffee, the counter sticky under my elbows. She was there, her laptop open, papers spread out like a map of her next deal. Her hair was pulled tight, her earrings catching the light. I didn't approach her, just ordered coffee and watched from the counter. Her laugh was too loud, her gestures too big, like she was performing for someone. A man in a suit joined her, his briefcase monogrammed with Pinnacle's logo. They leaned close, talking low, her hand brushing his arm. I sipped my coffee, its bitterness matching the knot in my gut, my eyes catching every move they made. When I got home, Wanda was cooking dinner, the smell of garlic and onions filling the kitchen, the windows fogged with steam. She asked about the meeting tomorrow, her tone careful, like she sensed something off. I said it was just family stuff. Nothing big, my voice hollow, even to me. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me, searching for what I wouldn't say. I wanted to tell her about the statements about Marjorie, about the tin I hadn't opened yet. But the words stuck caught behind a wall I'd built. If I told her, it'd be real. I'd have to act, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. The knife in her hand paused, then kept chopping the rhythm steady but heavy. That night I lay awake, Wanda's breathing steady, beside me the bedroom air thick with summer heat. The meeting loomed, Dad's voice on the phone, replaying in my head. Get everyone on the same page, he'd said. I saw his new watch, his polished shoes, the way he laughed as the will burned. My fingers twitched, wanting to grab the tin, to rip it open and read what Grandpa left behind. But I didn't move. The ceiling fan spun slowly, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Tomorrow, I'd face him. Tomorrow, I'd decide how far I was willing to go. But tonight, I just lay there, the tin's weight echoing in my chest, pulling me toward a choice I couldn't avoid. I sat at the dining room table, the wood worn smooth from years of family dinners. The faint smell of lemon polish clung to the air, mixing with the dust and old varnish. Dad stood at the head, his hands spread like a preacher, pitching the sale of Grandpa's land. Thelma and Bernice sat across from me, their faces, tight cups of coffee, untouched, their reflections faint in the window behind them. Marjorie was there too, her red nails tapping a pen against a notepad, her smile sharp as glass. The room felt smaller than it used to, the walls pressing in as Dad's voice filled the space. He talked fast about developers, big payouts, a fresh start for all of us. His voice was smooth, practiced like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. Bernice nodded along her eyes, bright with the promise of cash, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. Thelma's fingers twisted a napkin, her lips pressed thin, her gaze fixed on the table's edge. I kept my hands still, my face blank, but my pulse thumped hard, a steady beat under my skin. I knew what he was doing. The bank statements, the deposits from Pinnacle, they were no accident. This wasn't about family. It was about him, his hunger laid bare. I waited for a pause, my throat dry, then spoke, my voice low. "What about the will, Dad?" He froze, just for a second before laughing it off, his hand waving like he could brush it away. "No. Will," he said. "Must have gotten lost." His eyes flicked to Marjorie, quick like a signal, and she jumped in, saying, "Legal stuff gets messy, better to move forward." I leaned back my chair, creaking, the sound sharp in the quiet. Thelma's napkin was a pile of shreds, now her hands still working it apart. I caught her glance, brief, uncertain, like she was waiting for me to say more. Dad kept going, promising new houses, vacations, whatever Bernice wanted to hear. His words filled the room, but they felt hollow, like a sales pitch gone sour. I wanted to stand, to call him out, to say I'd seen the money, the offshore accounts, the burned will. But I didn't. My mouth stayed shut, my hands flat on my thighs. Thelma's eyes met mine again, longer this time, and I saw it, doubt, fear, maybe a flicker of trust. She wasn't ready to speak, and neither was I. Not yet. The air grew thick, like the room was holding its breath. Marjorie passed around a contract, her pen clicking louder now, her voice bright but brittle. "Just a formality," she said, "to get things rolling." Bernice reached for it, her fingers eager, but Thelma's hand hovered, then pulled back, her eyes on me. I cleared my throat, asked what the rush was. Dad's smile tightened, his knuckles white on the table's edge. "No rush," he said, "just good business." But his voice had an edge, like I'd stepped too close to his secret. The room felt smaller still, the carved initials under my fingertips, a reminder of what we used to be. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and asked about Pinnacle. The name hung in the air, heavy like a stone dropped in a pond. Marjorie's pen stopped. Dad's jaw twitched, just enough to notice. He said it was just a firm he'd talked to, nothing special, but his forehead glistened with sweat, his fingers tapping his thigh. Thelma's gaze held mine, her eyes asking a question she couldn't voice. I gave a small nod, barely noticeable, but it felt like a vow. The meeting ended with nothing signed. Dad clapped his hands again, like he'd won anyway, and said we'd talk more tomorrow. Marjorie gathered her papers, her smile gone. As they left, Thelma stayed behind, pretending to clean up, her hand brushing mine as she passed, a quiet signal. I knew then she was starting to see it too. I left the dining room, Thelma's touch lingering like a bruise. Outside, the air was thick, the kind of summer evening that clings to your skin, heavy with the promise of a storm. I drove to the edge of town, to a bar where nobody knew me. The neon sign buzzed, casting a red glow over the gravel lot, crunching under my tires. I sat in my truck, the engine off, the silence, loud, my phone buzzing with Wanda's text, asking when I'd be home. I didn't answer. I couldn't explain why I was here, why I needed to see what Marjorie was up to, why the tin in my pocket felt like a ticking bomb. Inside, the bar smelled of stale beer and fried onions, the jukebox playing a song I didn't recognize. Marjorie was in a corner booth, her laptop closed, a glass of wine, untouched, its surface catching the dim light. The man in the suit from the diner was there, his tie loosened, his voice low, urgent. I took a seat at the counter, ordered a soda, and kept my head down, my cap pulled low. Their words were muffled, but I caught fragments: offshore accounts, quick transfers, a deadline. My chest tightened, not with surprise, but with the weight of knowing. Dad wasn't just selling the land. He was hiding something bigger, something that could ruin us all, and I was the only one who saw it coming. I sipped my drink, the carbonation sharp against my throat, my eyes fixed on the counter's chipped edge. Marjorie laughed, a sound that cut through the bar's hum, and the man leaned closer, his hand on her wrist. I wanted to walk over, demand answers, but my legs felt heavy, like they were bolted to the floor. What would I say? That I'd snooped through Dad's papers, that I'd followed her like some paranoid fool. My fingers traced the rim of the glass, my mind racing, but my body still caught in the pull of doubt and certainty. A guy at the bar glanced my way, his eyes narrow, like he knew I didn't belong. I ignored him, but the feeling stuck that I was out of place, not just here, but in my own life. Dad's laughter from the meeting echoed the way he'd brushed off the will, the way Bernice ate up his promises. Thelma's shredded napkin, her silent question felt like the only thing anchoring me. But it was fragile, a thread stretched too thin. Marjorie and the suit stood gathering their things. She didn't see me, but as they passed, I heard her say, "We need to move fast before he figures it out." My pulse spiked. Was she talking about me or someone else? The uncertainty gnawed sharper than any fact. I paid for my soda, left a crumpled bill on the counter, and walked out into the night, the gravel crunching under my boots. The drive home was quiet, the road empty, except for the occasional flash of headlights. The world narrowed to the beam of my truck. Wanda was asleep when I got in her shoes by the door, a plate of leftovers covered on the counter. I stood in the kitchen, the fridge humming, the tin in the drawer calling me. I didn't touch it. Instead, I poured a glass of water, drank it slowly, the cold numbing my throat. The meeting had cracked something open, and now it was spilling out. Doubt, anger, a truth I wasn't ready to face. Tomorrow I'd see Thelma. Tomorrow I'd decide what to do. But tonight, I just stood there alone, the silence heavier than ever. I drove out to the treehouse at dusk, the sky bruised purple, the air heavy with coming rain. The dirt road was slick, my tires slipping as I parked near the sagging oak. The tin was still in my jacket, unopened, since I dug it up its weight, a constant pull. I climbed the rotting ladder, each step creaking under my weight, and sat inside the slanted roof, leaking cold drops onto my shoulder. The treehouse smelled of mildew and forgotten summers, its walls barely holding together. My fingers shook as I pried open the tin, the metal catching on my skin, leaving a faint sting. Inside was the envelope, yellowed but intact, Grandpa's handwriting scrawled across it. For Saul, it read. My chest tightened, a mix of dread and duty, but I tore it open anyway. The will was there, typed and notarized, naming me executor, the land to be held in trust for the family, never sold. A letter was folded with it, in Grandpa's shaky script, the ink smudged from time. He wrote about Dad's past loans, he never repaid deals he twisted for his own gain, lies he'd told to keep the family blind. He'd tried to fix him, Grandpa wrote, but some men only take. My throat burned, the words slicing deeper than I expected, each one a weight I hadn't known I carried. Dad's betrayal wasn't new. It was a pattern one grandpa saw long before I did, and he'd left it to me to stop it. I sat there, the letter in my lap, rain tapping the roof, the sound like a heartbeat. I wanted to feel angry, but all I felt was heavy, like I'd been carrying this truth my whole life without knowing it. The treehouse groaned in the wind, its walls sagging, and I thought about how I'd played here as a kid, believing Dad was someone I could trust. That belief was gone now, burned up like the will he thought he'd destroyed. I folded the letter, slipped it back into the tin, my fingers brushing the rough edges, and drove to Thelma's house, the wipers slapping rhythmically. Her bungalow was tucked at the end of a quiet street, the porch light flickering, casting jagged shadows. I knocked my hands stiff from the cold, the rain soaking my collar. She opened the door, her face pale, eyes red like she'd been crying, her sweater sleeves pulled over her hands. I didn't ask why, just followed her inside. The living room smelled of lavender and old books, a quilt draped over the couch, its colors faded but warm. We sat, and I showed her the will, then the letter. She read in silence, her fingers tracing the words, her breath catching when she reached the part about Dad. "He borrowed from me too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Took my savings, said it was for the family. Never paid it back." I didn't say anything, just watched her hands tremble, the same way Grandpa's had when he gave me the envelope. My stomach twisted, not just for her, but for me, for all of us who'd believed in him. Thelma looked up, her eyes sharp now, angry, like a fire had sparked inside her. "He can't keep doing this," she said. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, the weight of her words pressing against my ribs. I wanted to promise we'd stop him, but the thought of family against family held me back, a cold fear I couldn't shake. The rain outside grew louder, hammering the windows, and I felt the crack inside me widen, something breaking that I couldn't name yet. Thelma set the letter down, her hands folding tight in her lap, the quilt bunching under her. The rain battered the roof, a steady drum that filled the silence. The room dim under a single lamp's glow. I wanted to say something to fix the hurt in her eyes, but my words felt useless, like trying to patch a sinking ship with tape. She walked to a cabinet, its hinges squeaking, and pulled out a shoebox, its edges worn soft like it had been opened too many times. She set it on the coffee table, revealing a stack of old checks, cancelled, all written to Dad. "Thousands," she said, her voice flat, drained. "He said it was for the farm, for all of us." I stared at the checks. The ink faded, but the numbers clear, each one a stab of betrayal. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out what was left of my trust. Thelma wasn't just anyone. She'd baked me cookies as a kid, bandaged my scraped knees, believed in Dad, like I had. She sat back down, her shoulders slumped, the quilt slipping to the floor. She asked what we were going to do, her voice barely holding together. I didn't answer. Couldn't, my mind stuck on the checks, on Grandpa's letter, on Dad's laugh, as the will burned, echoing like a taunt. We sat there, the clock ticking too loud, the lavender scent turning sour in my nose. Thelma didn't cry again, but her silence was worse, like she'd already given up. I wanted to tell her I'd fix it, that I'd make Dad pay back what he took, but the words wouldn't come, stuck behind a wall of fear and guilt. I saw his face in my mind, red and laughing, so sure he'd gotten away with it. And me, smiling back, holding a secret I wasn't sure I could use. The rain's rhythm grew frantic, like it was trying to drown out my thoughts. I left her house, the rain soaking through my jacket, my boots sinking into the mud, the street dark except for a faint streetlight's glow. I drove aimlessly, the wipers slapping back and forth my headlights, catching nothing but wet asphalt and stray leaves. The tin sat on the passenger seat, its edges glinting under the dashboard light, a silent challenge. I pulled over my hands, gripping the wheel, the engine's hum, the only sound. The weight of what I knew, what I'd seen, pressed down until I couldn't feel anything else. Just the cold, empty shape of a family that wasn't mine anymore. A void where trust used to be. The rain had stopped, leaving the air damp and heavy, the streetlights casting long, wet reflections. I sat in my truck, the tin on the seat beside me, its edges catching the faint glow of a streetlight. My hands were steady now, the numbness from Thelma's house fading into something else, something sharp, like a blade finding its edge. I drove to a small office park on the edge of town where Leona, a lawyer I'd heard about from a co-worker, kept her practice. Her name was on a faded sign, the paint peeling like old skin, the building squat and unassuming. Inside the office smelled of stale coffee and paper dust, stacks of files teetering on her desk, a flickering bulb overhead. Leona was older, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a voice that cut through the clutter, her glasses perched low on her nose. I showed her the will, the letter, and the photos of Dad's bank statements. She read in silence, her pen tapping a slow rhythm, her face unreadable. "This is solid," she said finally, "but it'll cost you. Court's not cheap, and your dad won't go quiet." I nodded, my jaw tight, my resolve hardening like concrete. I wasn't here to back down, not anymore. She leaned forward, her chair creaking, and asked why I was doing this, her eyes studying me like I was a case file. I didn't answer right away, just looked at the framed photo on her wall. A family, not hers, but some stock image smiling in a way that felt false. "It's not just the land," I said, my voice low, but steady. "It's what he's done to us." She didn't push, just started typing, her fingers quick on the keyboard, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "We can file an injunction," she said. "Stop the sale cold. You sure you want to pull that trigger?" Her question hung there heavy, but I didn't hesitate. I thought of Thelma's shoebox, the checks Dad never repaid, the way he'd laughed as the will burned. "I'm ready," I said, my voice firm, no trace of the doubt that had gnawed at me. Leona nodded, like she'd heard it all before, and handed me a form to sign, her pen resting on a stack of legal pads. My hand didn't shake as I wrote my name, but my chest felt tight, like I was stepping off a ledge into the unknown. The air in the room felt stale, pressing against my skin, but I didn't waver. We spent an hour going over the details, Pinnacle's deposits, the will's terms, the land's mineral rights that Dad never mentioned. Leona's questions were sharp, digging into dates and numbers I didn't have, her notepad filling with tight, neat handwriting. I felt the weight of what I didn't know, but also the clarity of what I did. Dad thought he'd buried the truth in that fireplace. He was wrong. I stood to leave the tin back in my pocket, its edges pressing against my hip like a reminder of what was at stake. Leona's voice followed me to the door, warning me to brace for a fight. I nodded, already feeling it. Outside, the night was clear stars, sharp against the black, the air cold enough to sting. I pulled out my phone and called Dad, my thumb hovering before I hit send. He answered on the second ring, his voice loud, annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. "What's this about Saul?" I kept my tone even, said I needed to meet him tomorrow at Leona's office. He laughed short and harsh, like I was wasting his time. "You got nothing," he said. I didn't argue, just said be there at 10. Then I hung up, my heart steady, but heavy, knowing I'd just lit a fuse that couldn't be unlit. I drove home under a sky too clear, the stars mocking the mess I was walking into. Wanda was awake, sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, the steam curling like a ghost. The house smelled of chamomile and the faint bleach of her scrubbed floors, the light soft from a single bulb. She looked up, her eyes catching the strain in my face, the lines around them deeper than usual. "You okay, Saul?" she asked, her voice soft, but probing, her fingers tightening on the mug. I nodded, not trusting myself to say more, the tin's weight a steady pulse against my side. I sat across from her, the table cold under my elbows, the grain of the wood rough under my fingers. I wanted to tell her about Leona, the injunction, the call to Dad. But the words felt too big, like they'd break the quiet we'd built over years of small moments. Instead, I said I'd be out tomorrow, handling some family business. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't push, her eyes dropping to the tea. She reached for my hand, her fingers warm, calloused from her hospital shifts, and I let her hold it, even though I felt miles away, my mind already in Leona's office. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the house still dark, the air heavy with the promise of a long day. I pulled the tin from my pocket, set it on the counter, and stared at it, the metal dull, under the kitchen's fluorescent light. The will inside wasn't just paper, it was Grandpa's voice, his trust, the line he'd drawn that Dad had crossed. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. Leona had everything she needed to file, and I had everything I needed to face him. I dressed in silence, my old work boots scuffing the floor, their laces frayed but holding. I left before Wanda stirred the house quiet, except for the faint creak of the floorboards. Leona's office was the same, cluttered and dim, but it felt different now, like a place where things got done. She was already there, paper spread out, her coffee cup steaming, its bitter scent mixing with the dust. She handed me a draft of the injunction, the words stark and legal, locking the land in place until the will was settled. I read it, my eyes catching on phrases like fiduciary duty and fraudulent intent, each one cold final, like stones dropped into a still pond. My fingers brushed the paper's edge, the texture rough, grounding me. She asked if I was ready for what came next, court dates, depositions, maybe years of fighting. I thought of Thelma's shoebox, the checks Dad never repaid, the way he'd laughed as the will burned. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady, no trace of the doubt that had kept me up nights. Leona nodded, her pen scratching as she made a note, her glasses slipping slightly. She didn't smile, but her eyes held a flicker of respect, like she saw the shift in me the moment I stopped hesitating. I left the office, the injunction filed, the wheels turning, my phone silent, No call from Dad, no last-minute plea. I drove to the edge of the land where the fields stretched out green and untouched the morning air sharp. I got out my boots, sinking into the soft earth, and stood there, the wind carrying the scent of wild grass. I wasn't the kid who'd hidden the tin or the man who'd smiled as Dad burned the will. I was someone else now, someone who'd chosen to fight. I stood outside Leona's office, the morning air biting my knuckles as I waited for Dad. The parking lot was empty except for a delivery van, its engine idling like a low growl, its exhaust clouding the cold. My phone buzzed, Leona confirming the injunction was filed. No going back now. I tucked the phone away, my hands steady, but my stomach tight like I'd swallowed a stone. Dad's truck pulled up at 10 sharp tires crunching gravel, the sound sharp in the quiet morning. He stepped out, his face hard eyes scanning me like I was a stranger, his jacket too new, too clean for this dusty town. He walked past me into the office, his boots loud on the linoleum, his shoulders squared like he was ready for a fight. Leona was at her desk, the will and injunction papers neatly stacked her coffee cup, leaving a faint ring on the wood. She didn't stand, just gestured to a chair, her movements precise. Dad didn't sit. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his jaw set, the air around him thick with defiance. "What's this nonsense, Saul?" he said, his voice low, like he was scolding a kid, his eyes boring into me. I didn't flinch, just nodded to Leona, my pulse steady but heavy. She slid the will across the desk, her voice calm as she explained its terms. Land and trust me as executor, no sale allowed. Dad's face flushed, not red like when he burned the will, but pale, like he'd been caught, his hands clenching into fists. He laughed short and sharp and said I was out of my depth, meddling in things I didn't understand. Leona didn't blink, just pointed to the injunction already filed, freezing the land deal. Dad's eyes flicked to me, narrow and cold, his voice dropping lower. "You're no son of mine," he said, each word deliberate, like he'd been saving it for years. My chest tightened, a dull ache spreading, but I kept my face blank, my hands still in my lap, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. Leona stayed quiet, letting the words hang the room thick with their weight. I wanted to tell him I'd seen the bank statements, the checks he took from Thelma, but my tongue felt heavy, useless, like it was stuck to the roof of my mouth. Dad turned to the window, his back to us, his shoulders rising, then falling, like he was letting something go or holding something back. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the heater. Leona said we'd need to meet again after the court reviewed the filing. Dad didn't answer, just walked out the door, slamming behind him, the sound echoing in my ears. I stayed in the chair, the room too quiet now, the air heavy with the smell of old carpet and coffee grounds. Leona scribbled a note, her pen scratching like it was carving the silence, her focus unwavering. I felt the tin in my pocket, its edges worn smooth from my fingers, a constant reminder of what I'd set in motion. Dad's words echoed not because they hurt, but because they were true, in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't his son, not anymore, not after this. The thought didn't break me, it just sat there heavy, like a truth I'd always known, but never faced, cold and unyielding. I left Leona's office, the air outside sharp with the smell of wet asphalt, the sky heavy with clouds that hadn't broken. My truck felt too small, the cab closing in as I drove home, the tin still in my pocket, its edges pressing into me. Wanda was in the living room folding laundry, the TV muted, casting shadows on the wall, the air smelling faintly of fabric softener. She looked up her hands, pausing on a towel, her eyes catching the tension in my posture. "How did go, Saul?" she asked, her voice careful, like she was navigating a minefield. I said it was done, the injunction filed, but my voice sounded flat, like someone else's echoing off the walls. She nodded, her eyes searching mine, but didn't ask more, her hands resuming their folding with a quiet rhythm. I went to see Thelma that afternoon, needing to tell her it was real now. Her bungalow was quiet, the porch light off, despite the grey sky, the windows dark and uninviting. She opened the door, her face softer than before, but her smile didn't reach her eyes, her cardigan loose around her shoulders. I told her about the meeting, Dad's words, the way he'd walked out, my voice steady, but my chest tight. She listened, her hands clasped tight, and said she'd called Bernice. Bernice wouldn't talk, just hung up when Thelma mentioned the will. "She's with him," Thelma said, her voice low, like it hurt to admit, her eyes dropping to the floor. I nodded, my throat tight, picturing Bernice's eager nod at the family meeting, her blind trust in Dad's promises. We sat on her couch, the quilt bunched under us, the room heavy with the scent of lavender and wax, the light dim from a single bulb. Thelma didn't cry, but her fingers picked at a loose thread, unraveling it slowly, her movements restless. I wanted to say something to fix it, to tell her we'd get through this, but the words felt hollow before they even formed, like promises I couldn't keep. Instead, I told her the land was safe, for now, the injunction holding. She looked at me, her eyes sharp for a moment, and said, "At what cost, Saul?" Her question landed like a punch, and I didn't answer. Couldn't, my mind stuck on the family splitting apart. Back home, Wanda was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, the knife's rhythm, steady but loud, the air thick with the smell of onions and oil. She asked about legal fees, her voice careful, like she was stepping around glass, her eyes avoiding mine. I said we'd manage, but I saw the worry in her tightened jaw, the way her shoulders hunched. Our savings were thin, stretched from her overtime and my uneven work at the garage. This fight could drain us, and she knew it. I knew it too, but I didn't say it, just stood there watching her hands move, the blade flashing under the light, each cut precise but heavy. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bedroom was too warm, the sheets sticking to my skin, the air heavy with the scent of Wanda's lotion. Her breathing was soft, but I felt alone, like I'd stepped into a room no one else could enter. I thought of Dad's voice calling me, no son of his, and Bernice's silence choosing him over us. The land was safe, but the family was splitting, the cracks too deep to mend. I stared at the ceiling, the dark pressing down my mind, tracing the edges of what I'd started. It felt cold, final, like a door I'd closed without meaning to, its echo lingering in the quiet. The courtroom was small, all polished wood and stale air, the kind of place that felt too ordinary for what it decided. The judge's voice was flat, reading the ruling like a grocery list, his glasses slipping down his nose. The will stood. The land was locked in trust, untouchable. I sat in the back, my hands folded, watching Leona nod as she gathered her papers, her movements brisk but calm. The victory didn't feel like one, just a fact, cold and final, like a stone dropped into still water, its ripples fading fast. I drove out to the land afterward, parking where the fields met the woods, the horizon glowing soft orange. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine, the ground soft under my boots. I walked the boundary line, the grass brushing my knees, each step sinking slightly. Grandpa used to walk here pointing out where the old barn stood, where he'd planted trees with his father, his voice full of pride. I hadn't thought about those stories in years, but now they came back clear and sharp, like I was hearing them for the first time, their weight settling into me. Thelma called me later, her voice steady but warm, a hint of life in it. She wanted to meet talk about turning the land into a community preserve. I said I'd come by tomorrow, and she laughed soft, saying, "It's what Grandpa would have wanted." I hung up, standing in my kitchen, the phone still in my hand, the linoleum cool under my feet. Wanda was at work, the house quiet, except for the hum of the fridge, its low drone filling the silence. I felt lighter, not because the fight was over, but because I'd done something that wasn't just about me, something that reached beyond my own pain. I sat at the table, a glass of water sweating in front of me. The room dimmed the light from a single bulb, casting long shadows. I thought about Dad living across town now, his truck parked outside Bernice's place, their lights off by this hour. I hadn't seen him since the lawyer's office, hadn't heard his voice since he called me no son. The thought didn't cut like it used to, didn't draw blood. It was just there, a fact like the court's ruling, something I carried but didn't need to hold so tight. The kitchen window was cracked open, letting in a cool breeze, stirring the air. Thelma's idea stuck with me. A preserve, a place for people to walk, to remember what the land meant. I pulled out a notebook, started jotting down ideas, trails, a small visitor center, maybe a plaque with Grandpa's name. My handwriting was messy, the pen scratching loud in the quiet, the paper curling at the edges. I stopped looking at the page, the lines uneven but real, like a map of something new. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost, wasn't drowning in the past. I was thinking about what could be built, what could grow from the ground we'd fought for. I met Thelma at her bungalow the next morning, the air cool, the grass still wet from last night's dew, sparkling under the early sun. She had a map spread out on her kitchen table, the land's boundaries marked in red ink, the paper creased from use. Her hands moved, slow, tracing paths where trails could go. Her voice steady as she talked about native plants, benches, a small pond. I listened, nodding my coffee, cooling in a chipped mug, its handle worn smooth. Her eyes had a spark I hadn't seen before, like she was building something bigger than herself, her fingers smudged with ink. We drove to the land together, her old sedan rattling over the dirt road, the windows down, letting in the scent of fresh earth. She pointed out spots where kids could learn about the area's history, where families could picnic, her voice bright with possibility. I saw it in my head, the fields alive with people, not just ours anymore. I told her I'd take a part-time job managing the preserve, something to keep it running right. She smiled, said, I sounded like Grandpa, her words landing soft but heavy. My chest warmed, but I didn't say anything. Just kept walking beside her, the grass swishing against my boots. Back home, Wanda was waiting her shift, done her hair loose around her shoulders, catching the late afternoon light. We sat on the couch, the TV off the room, lit by a single lamp, its glow soft on her face. I told her about the preserve, the plans, the job. Her face softened, and she leaned into me, her head on my shoulder, her warmth steadying me. "We're stronger now," she said, her voice quiet, but sure, her fingers tracing mine. I squeezed her hand, feeling the calluses from her long shifts, and realized I'd been holding my breath for months, waiting for us to break. We hadn't, and that felt like enough for now. I didn't hear from Dad. His silence was a wall solid and cold, and Bernice stayed with him, her choice clear, her absence a quiet ache. I thought about calling, but the phone stayed untouched in my pocket, its screen dark. I didn't need his approval anymore, didn't need to explain why I'd fought. The land was safe, not for me, but for what it stood for. Grandpa's trust, Thelma's hope, a future. I could see now clear as the fields stretching out under the fading sun. That evening, I walked the land alone, the sun, low painting the grass, gold the air alive with the hum of insects. A breeze carried the scent of clover, sharp and clean, brushing against my skin. I stopped at the edge of the woods, where the trees Grandpa planted stood tall, their roots deep, their leaves whispering in the wind. I didn't feel anger or loss or even victory. Just quiet, like the world had settled into place. I stood there, hands in my pockets, and let the stillness hold me, the horizon steady and unbroken. I wake early now, before the sun crests the hill behind Grandpa's old house, its silhouette dark against the dawn. The air is cool, sharp, with the scent of dew-soaked grass, the ground damp under my boots. I pull on my boots, the leather worn soft, and head to the preserve, my thermos of coffee steaming in the morning chill. My new routine is simple. Check the trails, clear fallen branches, mark spots for new signs. The work is quiet, steady, the kind that fills the hours without asking for more. I walk the paths. Thelma sketched out the gravel, crunching underfoot, the air carrying the faint chirp of birds waking up. The preserve is taking shape, its trails winding through the fields, marked by small wooden posts. Volunteers come on weekends, their voices low as they plant saplings or set stones along the creek, their hands careful but sure. Thelma's there, often her hands in the dirt, her laugh softer than it used to be, like it's been dusted off after years. We don't talk about Dad or Bernice, but their absence lingers like a shadow that moves with the sun never quite gone. I don't push it. I've learned some things are better left alone, left to settle in their own time, like seeds waiting for rain. At home, Wanda and I eat dinner at the table. Now not the couch, the plates clinking softly, the sound drowning me. We talk about small things, her shift, my day, the way the preserve's wildflowers are starting to bloom, their colors bright against the green. Last night she mentioned a trip we might take somewhere north, just us, her voice light with a hope I hadn't heard in a while. I nodded my fork, pausing, and felt something loosen in my chest, like a knot I'd forgotten was there. We're not fixed, not perfect, but we're here, and that's enough for now. I keep a small office at the preserve, a shed with a desk and a window facing the fields, the glass streaked with dust. I sit there, sometimes the door open, the breeze carrying the scent of wild grass across the floor. I write down ideas, events for kids, a history trail, a bench by the pond. My handwriting's still messy, but it feels like mine, not borrowed from someone else's expectations. Dad's name comes up in stray moments, a flicker of memory, but it doesn't pull me under anymore. It's just a name now, not a weight. Thelma showed me a letter last week from a cousin I haven't seen in years, her handwriting neat on thin paper. She'd heard about the preserve, said she'd visit, bring her kids, her words careful but warm. I folded the letter, set it on the desk, and looked out at the fields, the sun high, the light steady. The ground under me felt solid, like it was holding me up, not pulling me down. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking, and let the moment sit quiet and whole. The preserve's first visitors came on a Saturday, a small group of locals, their boots crunching on the new gravel path, their voices mingling with the rustle of leaves. I stood by the entrance, a clipboard in hand, pointing out the trail map, my fingers smudged with ink. A kid ran ahead chasing a butterfly, his mom calling after him with a laugh that was light and free, like it belonged here. I watched them wander toward the pond, their shadows long in the late afternoon sun, and felt something settle inside me. Quiet, but real, like a piece of me had come home. I don't carry the tin anymore. It's in a drawer at home, the will safe, its job done, the metal dull but heavy with memory. I walk the land most days, checking fences or clearing brush, my hands finding a rhythm that feels like mine, the earth cool under my palms. The weight of Dad's choices, Bernice's silence, the fight. It's still there, but it's lighter now, like a stone smoothed by a river, its edges worn down. I don't need to prove anything anymore. Not to them, not to myself. I just need to show up, do the work, keep the promise I made to Grandpa without saying it out loud. Wanda's noticed the change, says, I'm easier to be around, like I'm not carrying a storm inside me. We sit on the porch some evenings, her hand in mine, the crickets loud in the dark, the air cool and clean. I don't talk about the past much, and she doesn't ask. Her silence, a gift I didn't know I needed. But last week she said she was proud of me, her voice soft like it was a secret, her eyes bright in the porch light. I didn't answer, just squeezed her hand, feeling the truth of it in my bones, warm and steady. I think about loyalty now, not the kind you give blindly, but the kind you choose, the kind that costs something. Grandpa's trust, Thelma's quiet strength, Wanda's steady presence, they're what I hold on to. Dad's gone, not dead, but gone in a way that's final. His absence, a space I no longer try to fill. I don't hate him. I don't need to. I've learned that some truths you carry until they don't hurt anymore, and then you set them down, not for anyone else, but for you. What's the hardest truth you've had to carry? If the story hits something real for you, leave a like, maybe subscribe, share it with someone who gets it. Thanks for listening, for being here. I'll keep telling these stories as long as they need to be told.